all stuff that we're going to talk about today. To give a little bit of introduction before I ask you to take the reins, I'll just give a quick kind of bio. Coach Andy, you're one of the world's top ultra running coaches. You have a bunch of articles featured in magazines in Australia, Hong Kong, the UK and US, and you've been on podcasts like ours, also Trail Runner Nation, to name another one. You've been coaching for 15 plus years, and you run your own coaching business called Mile 27. You should be quite recognizable to the Stryd community because you're a major contributor in the community group and one of the most recognizable names in the Stryd Power Coaching group. You've also been, like I mentioned on our podcast before, and I love anytime you can chime in and answer people's questions in the Facebook group. It makes a ton of difference, I think, for people that have general questions. You're an expert in that field for sure. Today, we're going to talk about ultra and trail racing in the context of it being a historic season. And there are going to be multiple reasons for that. But we're going to talk about maybe changing the plan, how you set expectations and goal setting after that, and then just overall behavior and solutions to the issues that are kind of emerging with the situation at hand with races getting postponed, different training environments and stuff. But Andy, I would love to ask you to give a little bit more background about yourself, just so people know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so Evan, thanks for the introduction. As Evan said, I'm kind of coach a large number of clients worldwide, clients UK, US, all over Europe, Asia, etc. Been lucky enough to be working with Stryd for probably the last, since the chest strap version. When was that?
2015, yeah. So I mean, coming up on what feels like forever, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. So I've been working with Stryd with my athletes for 5-6 years now, and I'm pretty much moved to almost all my new clients are using Stryd now. It just gives me so much more feedback to coach with, so much more information. I can feed back to them on intensities and go find a lot more information about how their training is going. So I'm pretty much only working with Stryd athletes now. Even in the trail and ultra field, like people kind of think that Stryd may not be that useful because of the trails, but there's still a huge takeaway from Stryd on trails. It only really falls down on super technical stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my sole business is this. This is all I do for a living. Mm-hmm. So it allows me the opportunity to spend all my days just talking about running and learning about running.
There are worse things out there than that.
There are.
Especially anybody that's tuning in right now, I imagine is really excited to just talk and get more feedback about running. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Like I mentioned, we have a couple topics. First one is changing the plan. With most races postponed until the fall, or postponed a couple months from now, at least, how should a trail or ultra runner's training plan be changing? And for people that maybe aren't familiar with this, we're going to do a couple topics that we've structured just so we can kind of have a continuous dialogue. And then if anybody has listener questions, please drop them in the chat, and Gus will send them our way, and we'll be able to answer those either interspersed throughout if they go along with the context, or just at the end in the listener Q&A section. But again, this first topic, with most races postponed to the fall, how should a trail or ultra runner's training plan be changing?
Yeah, so look, I think we've got to be realistic in terms of races. I would be very surprised if we get any real races before September. I think September, I mean, I'm a fairly optimistic type of guy, but I think even September is probably optimistic as well, but fingers crossed. But for a lot of people, there were big races in March, April, May coming up that have just been scrapped. So for a lot of people, if your race is in March or April or May or even June, you're probably moving into your biggest block of training where your long runs were the longest, your tempo runs were getting longer and longer, hill repeats were getting quite hard. Now, on one sense, it's tempting to think, well, I'll just keep doing that until my race and I'll be even fitter. But that kind of intensity isn't really sustainable for a long duration. Like, I would typically have my athletes in that phase for between 6 to 10, 12 weeks at the most, because it's just hard training, it's long training, mentally and physically, it takes a lot out of you. So with no races really till August, possibly later than that, you just got to back off from that. So you've got to let go of the high mileage, the super long runs, the super hard tempos, and cut it right back. Now, how far you cut it back kind of depends on your mindset, how optimistic you are on races, and what kind of motivates you to train. So if you're of the mindset there's going to be no races till September, October, November, then you probably want to give yourself an off season now. Give yourself 2, 3, 4 weeks where you pretend you've done your race. You let the training go. You just go back to basics, running for fun, enjoying your runs, and then gradually easing back into it, just like you normally would have done if you'd done a race in April, had some time off, then trained again for a race in October, November. Some people, they think, well, I've trained really hard. I've got this high level of fitness. I just want to throw it away and waste it. It seems such a shame to have trained since, I don't know, November or October last year, building up to a race in April or May, and now it's gone just to throw away that fitness. So for those kind of people, I think trying to find some kind of challenge that's realistic within the constructs of, or the constraints of where you live. I coach athletes all over the world, and some athletes are confined to their apartment. Some can get outside into apartment car parks or their backyard. Some can go 1 or 2 Ks from their home. Some can go to parks. So everyone's in a different situation. But if you're the type of athlete that wants to make use of your fitness, then I suggest trying to think of something you can make up yourself, some challenge that can be a reward for the training you've put in. Now, whether that's like, I don't know if you've seen on Facebook, but there's a lot of self-isolation ultras where people have doing
Yes.
50 up and down their backyard.
Or like on I think the balcony, a guy in France, got like really popular. Yeah.
So look, it's not something you can do a lot of. Mentally, it's extremely tough, but it might be a case of, look, I've trained really hard. Like, I may as well do something ridiculous just to make use of this training. Have something I can talk about to people when all this is over, saying I did this self-isolation ultra. I think as trail runners, the natural tendency is to go, well, I'll go to my local trail and I'll construct this great little course that I've always wanted to do. But I think we have to be careful on how many people are going to be at the trail. Does you doing that kind of contravene the guidelines of your government? Does it put you in any risk? Like, if you're going to go to a remote trail somewhere, if you fall over, get bitten by a snake, break an ankle or whatever, then you're putting demand on the medical facilities that we just don't need at the moment. So I think you've got to be a little bit sensible on just where you're going to do this thing. So for a lot of people, it's kind of like not going too far from home. So if you're doing laps, something like that can be still safe within the guidelines of your government's recommendations, and you can still make use of that fitness. Do your event, and then you can go into an off season and then build back from there. So I think one of those two options, either find a race for yourself to do, or go to an off season and then build back up from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And, we're based here in Boulder, Colorado, so there are a bunch of great trails for people to be doing. And it seems like every time I go out to, go jog, because we don't have the restrictions here that you have to stick inside your apartment or only within 1 or 2 Ks, seems like trails are busier than ever now. Like, everybody is, if you're allowed to be outside, everybody is outside. So I definitely appreciate that kind of comment on being respectful and at least knowledgeable about, if you're going to be doing this, know the implications of.
I think for some people too, what I'm finding, the feedback I'm getting is that with the trails being a lot busier than they usually are with people that aren't normally on the trails, the people that know the trails really well, they're either going on to the lesser known trails or waiting till it's a rainy day, and going, okay, it's pouring with rain today, the trails are going to be deserted again, now I can have the trails to myself again. So making use of bad weather to get out and enjoy your runs, rather than going, oh, it's a beautiful day today, I want to head out to the trails. It might be a time to do a road run on the back streets to stay away from people. So just need to be smart about that, following your government's guidelines.
Yeah, totally. Next kind of guiding topic we have here is, how are you, as a coach, like you mentioned, you coach a ton of athletes across the world. How are you taking advantage of this extra time to prepare your athletes to race once the time comes for them to actually race?
Yeah, so if we kind of accept that there's going to be races until September or later, it means for a lot of people that means you've got longer to build up for your race. You know, a lot of people are kind of working on, you know, racing every 2 or 3 months. So having 6 or even 8 months or possibly longer with no races gives you a long time to build up. So there is the potential to work on some things that either you may not have worked on before or you may not have spent a lot of time on before. So a few things that most people do. Strength training is one. Everyone can do strength training. There's no restrictions on that. You might not be able to get to the gym. A lot of countries' gyms are closed, but there's a ton of good strength work you can do at home. You know, I sell strength training videos and it's all home-based stuff. So I think for all of us, we could spend more time strength training. And I think for some people that may have busy jobs that never they know they should be doing strength training, but never really find the time to do it. Well, now you're working from home, you don't have the commute. No, you've probably got more time. Investing 2 half-hour sessions a week on strength is going to make a big difference. So I think first thing I'd say is get onto some strength training and see the benefits that can give you. And then you've got a whole lot of other things that really depend on the environment you have. Because some people are very restricted, some people have not that many restrictions. But I would, presuming you don't have too many restrictions, I would look at doing what you haven't done much of before. Because typically we tend to do whatever we like doing. And obviously the more you do something, the less gains you get from that. So if you love tempo runs, you love just popping out 2 by 20 minute efforts and you get a good buzz from it. It's never super hard, but you know there's good training benefits from that. And you've done a lot of that. Well, that's great. And that's certainly a part of, you know, any good training program. But if you've never done any really high intensity work, it might be time to go, okay, well, let's back off the tempo stuff and maybe do some VHM max sessions, or maybe do some strides. Maybe you've never done 100-meter strides, never done any real true speed work before. Well, there's gains to be had from that. So I think you've got to look at what you typically do and what you haven't done much of, and thinking about, well, maybe I should do some more of what I haven't done before, because I've got time to experiment. I could do a month of just 200-meter, 300-meter repeats, which I've never done before, but I'm not going to lose anything. I'm going to gain some speed. Okay, I might lose a little bit of endurance, but that speed I can then translate into endurance because I've got plenty of time to work on that. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I think you've got to look at, if you're really restricted, you might think, well, me, for example, I'm in self-isolation. I come back from overseas and I'm in 14 days quarantine in a house with a 20-meter side run along the side fence. So like 20 meters, what can I do? So you've got to think, well, as a coach, I've had to think a little bit more laterally and outside the box. Now, I know for me, I did a run the other day. It was just 3Ks, but I started off easy and I thought, let's just pick up the pace and just see what happens. And what I noticed is that the changes of direction every 20 meters is like running downhill because you're decelerating. And the faster you go in that 20-meter run, the more deceleration is required at the end of each 20 meters. So now I've got a means of training my legs for downhill that don't involve hills. So, you know, as a coach, I'm just trying to think outside the box. I've got a client who lives in an apartment block, and she's got a balcony, a rooftop terrace that's about 6 meters long, and mentally it's just doing her head in. So, but she's got 3 levels. So she's kind of running from the lounge room, up a flight of stairs, up another flight of stairs, up another flight of stairs, along the balcony, back down again. So, okay, stair work. So let's put a weighted pack on. Let's get some more strength going on stairs. Let's try and run 2 at a time. So I think we've got to look at what we've got to work with and how we can put that into a training session that's going to give us either some mental or some physical benefit. And as a coach, you know, people say, oh, you must be pretty bored of training programs at the moment because people are so restricted. And it's the exact opposite. I have to think outside the box and come up with all these creative routines to get people still training as effective as they can and making sure they're not bored, because everyone's tolerance for running laps is different. You know, some people can run 7 meters up and down the balcony for 50K and find that fun. Other people doing 1K loops around the house is mind-numbingly boring. So it's about trying to understand a person's mindset and trying to make the training as effective and as fun as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I want to touch on one thing you kind of mentioned here before we talk about the next point we had listed. There is a difference between somebody right now in a situation of, maybe this isolation, and they say, I'm not going to run, and then once, I come out the other end, then I'm going to run once the normal situation opens up again. What would you say to somebody who has never had a coach before and has only trained for running before, but never been coached for running before? Because you mentioned, working with an athlete's incredibly unique situation of, only being limited to running up the stairs, or like yourself, running back and forth for a 20-meter stretch. That is a benefit I feel like not a lot of people might understand. A lot of people maybe assume that a coach is only somebody that writes a training plan, and then you have only workouts. But coaching from the running side of like what you do with a specific context like this is incredibly unique. So could you just maybe talk to the point of somebody that has never had a coach before, has maybe been interested in a coach, but maybe about the benefits of having a running coach, and maybe tying it in with this situation as well?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, a lot of people do think, those who haven't got a coach, they do think coaching is just, the coach just gives them a running program and away you go. And I think especially in this situation, for me, I'm trying to understand my clients in terms of what do they want to do in this period of time. Like it's a difficult, challenging time for a lot of us. And some people have the mindset that running is going to take a back seat, and they want to find the minimum they can do to keep themselves sane, keep themselves fit, but not have training as another stress on top of all the other stresses. Whereas other people are like, well, I want to be as fit as possible. I want to come out of this as fit as I possibly can. So when things resume normality, I'm in a good position to work from that. So for me, it's trying to understand people's motivations for training and for racing, and trying to also understand what kind of their headspace in terms of what they enjoy about training. Because I know for some clients, if I told them to do laps of their backyard, they would just go, no, I'm not doing it. Other clients would go, how many should I do? Like, can I do 2 hours? Can I do 4 hours? Like, and how many? I could run all day like that. So I think my job as a coach is really trying to understand a person's motivation, and trying to understand how to get the best of that mental and physical balance, so they keep enjoying their training, stay motivated, and get the best fitness results from that. So as a coach, for me, the better I know my clients personally, and most of my clients will know that I can catch up with them socially, and we're good friends. Like most of my clients are good friends. I travel around the world as often as I can, and try to catch up with my clients when I can. And we're always going out socially and talking about things, because the better I know them, the better I can coach them. So those people who haven't got a coach, who kind of wondering, is it even worth it this time? I think if you've got a coach that you can open up a good open communication and dialogue about your thoughts on running and what's realistic. You might say, look, I'm working from home. I've got 2 kids. I've got a homeschool. My husband also works from home, or my wife also works from home. Can you help me at all? It's like, well, of course I can. You've got to let me know what's realistic and what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, and we can work out the most effective way to train. So I think any good coach that's worth its salt will make an effort to get to know the client and get to know their thoughts about running, their emotions on running. Because some people, running is a real clutch. It's a real kind of thing they rely on, for mental health. In this time, there's so much going on. Without running, mentally they really struggle. So it's important to let your coach know that. Whereas other people go, look, I'm very matter of fact. If I can't run as much, if I can only run 20 minutes 3 times a week, that's fine. I've got other stuff I need to get through the week. It's so stressful. Just give me the minimum. So it's really important to have a relationship with your coach. It's really open and honest, and you get the most out of your coach from that. It's not just about running programs. A lot of my clients, we have long discussions about races and what to do to stay motivated, and alternatives, and what you can do if you're at home, and how to approach running up and down a driveway for an hour mentally, and how to still enjoy that process rather than just go, here you go, run up and down the driveway for an hour and that's it. Like it's about a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think that's great. One specific maybe example I have is I know you've been working with training for Mike at Stryd, who does a lot of our design stuff, and he's a avid ultra and trail runner. But when we went to New York City for the marathon last year, all of a sudden, we weren't maybe able to run directly from, our door like we normally would in Boulder. So he had to adapt to a treadmill workout. So I've seen examples specifically of, a great coach like yourself, work with somebody's, specific situation, because nobody's the same in terms of the
No,
situations
exactly.
that they're in.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point, but I wanted to get that in there because I think a lot of people maybe just assume, that a coach is somebody that only gives running workouts and doesn't do anything else. But obviously,
Yeah.
they're
It's
very
a lot more
concrete
involved.
examples. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Last point here we have for the first topic, and this was something I was going to think of organically until I read it that we already had here, is are you having your athletes do any time trials or solo efforts to fill in for canceled races? And my mind instantly popped to when you mentioned earlier of setting out, a trail loop by you and just going to race that. So in the ultra and trail world, there's the concept of an FKT, or the fastest known time. And that's not something that a lot of regular road runners or track runners think of, but maybe this could be in consideration for them, touching on this point. So if you could expand on this, because doing a time trial for a ultra or trail runner is a different thing like mentally for a road runner,
Yeah.
but maybe you could kind of cross the lines between them.
Yeah, so there's a couple of schools of thought there in terms of those who kind of really racing is their prime motivation for training. Like without races, they're kind of like, what's the point of training? So if you're that kind of athlete, then I think setting some challenges every 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever motivates you, and it also depends on the distance, is probably key to keeping you sane. So what that might look like, assuming you can get to your trails, assuming it's safe to do so, you might decide to do a 20K or a 30K or even 50 mile, or anything that's safe within the constraints of your government. Health advice is fine. So practicalities are obviously key for that. Like I've got a client who was thinking of doing an out and back 100K. So you have to think about, okay, getting to and from the trail end, water stops, nutrition stops, all that kind of stuff have to be taken into account. And you have to think about, am I putting anybody at risk? Am I putting myself at risk? Is it safe to do so in this time of the virus? Assuming it is safe to do so, then if you're a very race motivated person, then definitely scheduling something every probably 2 or 3 months to keep yourself sane is going to be beneficial to help you stay motivated, to help you keep doing the training you're doing. For a lot of people, racing is the icing on the cake. They do like racing, but don't race for 4 or 5 months and they're still fine. But they still like something to measure progress. They still want to have some kind of feedback that training is going well. So I think taking the FKT and applying it to, because FKT, we typically think about Appalachian Trail or some big, long, mammoth kind of challenge, but we can make an FKT with our local 5-mile trail route. We can make an FKT with the normal road running route you typically do. Strava's great for this because you can just construct your own route. You can go, right, here's my 5-mile loop. I'm going to run hard on that every 5 weeks and test myself as far as fitness goes. So I think that kind of stuff can work really well for a lot of people to keep themselves sane, and it is a good measure on your fitness. You may be limited on the type of terrain you can do that on. So, for example, a lot of places in Australia, you're not, and Asia and a lot of Europe as well, you're not allowed to drive to a trail and then run and then drive back again. So you can only run from your house. Now, if you're lucky enough to live near a great trail, fantastic. But if there's no trails nearby, then you're limited to road runs. And that might be flat, so you can't even do hills. But there's no reason why you couldn't construct your own 5-mile, 10K, 15K road run locally to your place and make that as your time trial that you do once every 4 to 6 weeks to measure some progress. So I think we just have to be a bit creative on what we do training-wise, except that, okay, I'm training for a 100-mile, 100K race that's full of mountains, and I live somewhere that I can't get to hills. that's just the way it goes. You can only do what you can do. You can't make hills. So except that, okay, I'm going to work more on my road running ability, which is going to be beneficial for trail and ultra races anyway. Like I know for, say, UTMB, Ultra Mont Blanc, for those who don't follow the trail world that heavily, 100 miles, 10,000 meters of vert around Mont Blanc in France. The downhills are very runnable and they're very long. Like the longest downhill is 20-something kilometers. So, and it's very, very runnable. So if you're not used to running non-stop for long periods of time, then you're going to limit your ability to run that kind of race well. Now, a lot of trail runners don't run for long periods of time. They might go out for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, but there's a lot of hiking in that time and a lot of kind of technical stuff, and they're not used to running 20 Ks non-stop downhill. So flipping it around and going, okay, well, I can't get to hills, so doing a 10-mile time trial on the flat is going to be beneficial. And I can use that to motivate myself. I can measure my times every 6 weeks, get some feedback on that, and make sure that I keep motivated and improve my fitness throughout that time. So I think there's lots of ways you can approach it. I think you need to think about what motivates you, and then construct challenges that fit in with the training you can do and the access to roads and trails around your place that you've got, and base it on that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I know we've talked to a couple people on the show in the past, and they've had suggestions for things like a neighborhood loop. So when people maybe hear stuff like this and hear it coming from esteemed ultra and trail coach, you don't have to just keep any of these recommendations you hear today solely for trails. You can definitely take all this knowledge and transition it no matter what situation you're in. I want to touch on a couple questions we got in here, and if anybody watching this or tuning in now has any questions, please put them in the chat, and producer Gus will send it our way. This first question is, do you use power targets for racing over courses with lots of elevation gain? Do you apply any rules of thumb, like 10% higher power on uphills, 10% lower on downhills? Thanks in advance. This from Bentz, and this came, I think, from the Facebook post.
Yeah, look, that's a great question, and not an easy one to answer quickly. I think if you look up my name and Stryd Trail and Ultra Coaching, I talked about it for about an hour on how to apply power targets to trail and ultra races. And the short answer is yes, you definitely can. If there's lots of technical sections, then the algorithm and power kind of falls down a bit. I did a race, a really short race. It was 6.5 Ks. It basically went up a hill and back down again. Maximum gradient was 70% at the top. So my power kind of started off at like about 10%, and power was fine.
Right.
From what I've seen, power degrades at about 25-30%. So once you get above 25-30% gradient, the power numbers start to make less and less sense.
Right.
So for me, my power data just kind of started up here and just went down, down, down. So
Right.
by the top of the climb, I was doing like 30 watts.
Right.
It's obviously completely meaningless and not any way you can use it at all.
Right.
But that's exceptional. You know, not too many races have that. For the vast majority of trail ultras, and that's pretty much all I coach. Like I don't coach much other than trail ultras. For the vast majority of them, you can use power, and you should use power to help you pace the races. If you just type into Google Stryd Andy DuBois YouTube, and you'll come up with a discussion on that. Plus, I've got a free kind of video series on my website that I've not quite finished yet, but it should be over the next month or two on exactly how to do that and going into a bit more detail. So yeah, it's a complicated answer, but yes, you definitely can.
Awesome. And then, yeah, for anybody watching, Gus just let me know he posted in the chat, and we'll also, if you're watching this after the fact, we'll post it in the description, or if you're listening, we'll post it in the show notes as well. But you've done at least a full hour webinar that I've recommended at least 1,000 times to people to watch, and then another podcast as well where we kind of went into talking about this stuff. Emanuela asks, expanding on Ben's question, how should one adjust power when the incline is not constant? Is there a rule of thumb? And so this is following on the same thing. You've talked very, very in depth about some specific examples, but maybe on this side, talking about when the incline is not constant? So if you
Yeah,
had a straight up 70% grade versus that kind of up and down.
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, it depends on how much it varies. I mean, all the stuff that I've seen, if your hill's varying between, say, 8% and 20%, then power doesn't really change much. Certainly not enough to worry about, because on trails, power will kind of jump around a little bit anyway. The noise, like if you're on a road, power is kind of like this. If you're on a trail, it's jumping around like this. So the noise in the data from, say, a 10% incline to a 18, 20% incline is not enough to change your power targets. If you're doing a 4 or 5% incline and a 20% incline, then yeah, it might change. And as a coach, what I do is look at the athlete's training and look at how the data might change. So I'll know from their training data that when they hike up a very moderate grade, there might be, 20 watts higher or lower than when they hike up a 20% incline. But for most ultras, when you go on a climb, it doesn't really change enough. And if it does, it's usually running. So it might be like 10 or 15% and flattens off for 2 or 3%. So you run that, then it goes back up to 10 or 15%. So the actual hiking phase doesn't really change that much. So short answer is test in training. Test your hills, test it on a 5%, test it on a 15%, and you'll see the data changes. But generally, for a lot of races, the noise in the data is more than the changes in power anyway, so you don't have to worry about it.
Right. Yeah, great. I have had, just speaking personally, one experience ever doing a trail race with Stryd, and I listened to your webinar before I did it, and you mentioned specifically about power hiking versus running, and you'll be able to see, things respond very quickly. And like the completely novice trail runner I am, the first time we hit a big incline, I kept running. I looked down at my watch, and it was like I was equivalently on a flat running a 5-minute mile, trying to suffer an 8-minute mile pace up a huge hill at 8,000 feet above sea level. And so a lot of these considerations are great for, I'll touch on kind of one line of questioning I have later, but for any person that considers themselves only a road or a track athlete getting curious about ultra races or trail races, I think a lot of these points are going to be great to talk about. So I'll get to the rest of the questions after we do this next kind of line here of expectations and goal setting. So again, talking with your athletes, how are you setting goals with them?
Yeah, look, I think the goals need to be brought back quite a lot in terms of, typically we'll have, I've got a goal to finish, Western States or Leadville or UTMB, or I want to do my first 100 miler, I want to do my first 100K. I think with no races, certainly no races confirmed for who knows how long. And the race you were thinking of might not be till next year. So we're talking long-term goals. So I think you have to think, how motivated are you longer term versus shorter term? So I know me personally, I'm a long-term goal motivated person. So when I set goals, I usually set them 8, 10, 12 months in advance. I don't have too many short-term goals. I knuckle down, train hard for 6, 8, 10, 12 months and focus on one race. So people like that, it's pretty easy because you think, okay, well, this year's races are gone, so I'm going to focus on next year's races. That's fine. But from experience, people like me aren't that common. Most people need some shorter term goals to keep themselves motivated, to keep it interesting. So then I think you need to scale back those goals into things you have control over. In this day and age, we're losing so much control of things. You can feel a little bit helpless in terms of, I can't even leave the house at the moment. So my world is very small and I've got little to no control over anything outside. So it's about trying to think about, what have I got control over? So the first thing you've got control over is how often you exercise. So that's the first goal. Is, okay, set myself a goal of being consistent throughout this time. Now, what that consistency looks like depends on, obviously, the individual. For some people, that might mean just trying to run 3 times a week. That's all I can really manage. For other people, it might be, look, no, there's no reason why I can't train 7 days a week. What that training looks like might differ, but I can still train 7 days a week. So I think understanding that any good result comes from consistency. You know yourself with your kind of marathon time trial and stuff, it doesn't come on the back of 2 months of hard training. It comes on the back of month after month after month of consistent training, week in, week out. So I think the first goal for most people is consistency, thinking about what that consistency looks like and making sure that consistency goal is tied in with bigger goals. Because for some people, the goal of consistency is not enough by itself, because they might not have that link to their bigger term goals. So you've got to think to yourself, well, if I can be consistent, this is going to be the result of that consistency. If I can be consistent now, when things kind of get back to the new normal, then I'll be in a great place to set a new PB for this next race in early next year or late this year or whatever. So I think consistency is the first goal. Then if you're the racing kind of person, I think setting short-term goals on, as we talked about before, a local loop, an FKT that's small and local. It could be a time trial up your local hill. It could be, a 1K rep. It could be a time to focus on your speed. Set a goal. Well, like I can do 1 mile or 1K in, I don't know, an 8-minute mile or a 4.5-minute K. Let's see if I can spend the next 6 weeks knocking off 10 seconds off that, and set yourself a goal of doing that. Keeping in mind that unless you buy into that goal, it's not very motivating. So, people can set goals, but unless you've kind of made the connection and that goal really resonates with you and you kind of get that bit of excitement about achieving that goal, then you're not going to do it. Like it's easy for me as a coach to say, look, this is your goal. But unless the client takes that on board and unless that goal is meaningful for them, it's pointless, because any challenge that gets in the way of achieving that goal is just going, it's too hard, I'll just forget about it. So we've got to make sure whatever goal we come up with, we really kind of connect with, it's meaningful, it has purpose, that goal will lead to a sense of satisfaction afterwards. So for that reason, you've got to really think about what motivates you, and be realistic about that, because otherwise you're just going to lose motivation because if you're in a position now where you can get to trails and you're not really restricted on what you can do, but 2 weeks time the walls come in and now you can only go a K from your home, that goal may suddenly be eliminated and you've got to reset your goals. So you've got to really think about what motivates you and what keeps you excited, what makes you run up and down the backyard, or what makes you kind of run up and down a small hill lots of times, and keep it interesting and motivated, because if you can't come up with the reasons for that, you're just going to go, this is boring as hell. I just can't do it. So I think it's really important to think about those goals. And I think goal setting, I know with a lot of ultra athletes, we tend to just fall into doing the same races year in, year out, because they're the races that everybody does. And a lot of people find that once they've done that 2 or 3 times, they lose their motivation because they never really addressed why they're doing these races and what their goals were once they've done them once. It's just a thing you do. You just enter the local big race because everyone does it. And so I think it's a good time to reassess what running means to you, what races mean to you, why you want to do them in the first place, and really drill down on what's important. And I think we can use this time to kind of assess that. We can come out in a better mental headspace after this, which will help us longer term.
What might be an example of a manageable, actionable, and achievable goal you would recommend people that are maybe like yourself, how you described yourself, you focus on the 6, 8, 10, 12 month out period, but now you can take advantage of practicing setting a goal that you can, tackle or try in a 2, 4, 6 week period? What would be, you mentioned like a 8-minute mile person or a 430 kilometer person. Maybe give one example of a quick goal somebody could set, and then how they could see that through to the end over a couple week period.
Yes, I'd look at where your strengths and weaknesses are, and if you're the type of person that when you run, a 10K or a 5K, sorry, you're only a fraction faster than your 10K speed, then I would work on speed. I kind of look at a goal of improving your 1K speed or improving your 1 mile speed. If you're the kind of person that's got, can push out a 80-second or 90-second 400-meter time, but then your 10K you struggle to break 45 minutes or something like that, then maybe some tempo work, maybe setting 5 mile or 10K goal would be a good goal to work towards. So virtually for ultra runners, sometimes, in this time when doing long races and stuff really isn't an option, working on either really short speed, like 1 mile, 1K, or 5K, 10K, 10 mile speed is going to be a really good goal that will help you longer term. So I'd first identify one of those two options. The alternative, of course, is if you've got hills to run on, you might say, well, my short speed up hills is appalling. I just can't, if coach sets me 90-second hill repeats versus 5-minute hill repeats, there's no difference in speed. I just pump out the same speed. So then I'd work on short speed on the hills, or it might be the opposite. I can bound up a hill in 60 seconds really fast, but 5-minute hill, I'm slow as anything. So I'd look at longer hills. So I'd kind of think about where your strengths and weaknesses are and go, okay, my weakness is, short speed, 1 mile, 1K, and work on that. So then that becomes the focus of your training. You think, well, if I want to get faster at 1 mile, I'm going to need to do 200 meter, 300 meter, 400 meter type reps. Much longer recoveries than usual, so I can get the speed up. Ask your coach, or look at Google's got plenty of advice just to put you in the ballpark of what you should be doing, and then map out a 4 or 6 week plan. Because 6 to 8 weeks is a good time frame to be able to knuckle down for some training and then get the body to respond to that, see some adaptations to that, and then test it out in training. 4 weeks is probably not enough, but 6 to 8 weeks, you can set yourself a goal to go, okay, I'm going to test my 1K speed now, and then I'm going to do it again in 8 weeks' time after having trained hard for this period of time. And that can be, if you can get on board with that goal and say, well, if I can do that, then I know that's going to help my bigger goals of next year doing a 50 miler, then fantastic. So that's what I think I would be looking at. If you've got access to trails, it might be a little bit different. You might think, well, I've got this little trail around my place, and my technical skills are pretty poor. So I'm going to run this loop and work on my technical skills and see if I can get my time down from 43 minutes down to sub 40 or something like that. So it doesn't even have to be a set time. It could be your local loop. And, I know for me, like my local standard run is out and back to a top of the lighthouse and back again. And the fastest I've done it is 62 minutes. So if I was living at home, which I'm not, but that's a long story, that would be my goal. I'd work on trying to get that down to sub 60. Because it's a great goal. It's a loop I do all the time. It's safe to do in constructs of what's going on. It translates really well to a better ultra pace. And I know what I need to do to work on that. So I think that's how I would be thinking about it. Even when we haven't got a coach, is thinking about what you've got, what your strengths and weaknesses are, plan a 6 to 8 week approach, test, retest, see your progress, and you can reassess after 8 weeks you've done your test and do it again.
Awesome. Are the goals that you're giving your clients, your athletes, more aggressive because now there is more time to train? And then we've asked this question to a couple different coaches, but because you specifically use Stryd to coach athletes, now that people have more time, are you giving like a % higher like target now, or just talk maybe about the aggressiveness and new mindset that you're incorporating with your athletes?
Yes, I think if you're a road coach and you're coaching someone for 10K, half marathon, and the race you were doing in July has been cancelled, so your next option is November, you kind of think, well, we were targeting 3:15 for the marathon in July, but now we've got an extra 4 months, so maybe 3:10, maybe 3:05 as possible. So from that mindset, the targets can be more aggressive. For ultras, it's quite a lot different, because I'm certainly not a believer in time goals for ultras. The nature of ultras means that you can do the same race, same fitness, and due to the weather conditions or the trail conditions, you could be much quicker or much slower. And also, due to ultras taking 10, 20, 30, 40 hours, a lot can happen in that time. And so you can have a race that feels better, but is actually slower for all kinds of reasons. So I'm never a big believer in setting, really strict time goals for any kind of ultra. I think time goals work well for planning nutrition, hydration, letting your support crew know that, okay, I'm roughly looking at between 14 and 16 hours for this ultra, which means I'm going to get to halfway at 6 or 7 hours. But in terms of, like having a road running coach's approach, I don't think that really works well at all. Because when I coach guys for ultras, it's really about, the goal is to have the best race you can have on the day, given all the problems that occur in an ultra. An ultra is about troubleshooting on the day. Stuff always happens. Nutrition goes wrong, stomach's upset, you get little niggles, you get lost. The course is more technical because they've had rains recently. It's sandier. There's more people on the trail. You had a bottleneck before it got to single track. Like, so many things can happen that can affect your end time, and you can have a better race and actually run slower than the previous year because of all these things. So I think the goal I try and instill in my athletes is to have the best race possible on the day, given the fitness you had going into the race. So from that point of view, that doesn't change. Like whether you've got 3 months to prepare for the race or 12 months, the goal is still to have the best race possible on that day. What does change, of course, is the training you can put into the race. So, for example, one of the big races in Australia, the Ultra Trail Australia, which is in May, has now been postponed till October. So if a lot of people, and this is the same in a lot of ultras, they have a different color buckle depending on what time you finish the race. So 14 hours is a kind of like a major time goal for a lot of athletes in UTA. Now, if you're on the cusp of, say, running 14 and a half in May, then maybe with another 6 months training, running sub 14 is the new goal that's quite possible. But that doesn't really change anything in terms of training wise. It doesn't change anything in terms of how I prescribe training or power. It just means that as you get fitter, because you've got more time to train, yes, your FTP, CP might go up more, and therefore it changes the numbers, but that would have happened anyway if you were training for your race of September. So for me, it doesn't really change anything at all. But if you're a road runner and you're targeting a specific time, because obviously road running is a lot more measurable, the variables are a lot more constrained, then yes, it would change your potential goals for sure.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. And this next question is on the back of that one, because road running and trail and ultra stuff is so different. It is not the same sport at all. Even though you can still be running, it is entirely different sport. Just because people in a road race might have to, deal with the complication of they had to slow down a quarter of a second around one turn. Well, if you have 100 people in front of you and all of a sudden you're going down to single track from the funnel, then you have to wait and pass people. So totally different. And I think this will open a lot of people's eyes. The question after this is, will people you coach or other trail athletes all of a sudden try and squeeze in more races? Because we've seen 5 of the world marathon majors are now within like a 6 to 8 week period for the roadside. And all the 5Ks and 10Ks that are maybe local races for people that people have signed up for, they've been postponed, and everything's just condensed and pushed into this block of time where a lot of road athletes are going to do this. Do trail athletes or ultra athletes have the same approach, or do they just still pick that one point on the calendar and aim all in for that?
Yeah, I think that really depends on the type of athlete you are. For some people, ultras are about completing and not really racing. Some people, it's about the journey, just completing a course in different locations, and whether they do it in 16 hours or 18 hours really doesn't matter at all. They would rather race every 4, 5, 6 weeks and just have the experience of doing the ultras, fully aware that maybe if they dropped half of their races, they could go much quicker. But to them, that's not what racing is about. Racing is about starting, finishing, enjoying the journey along the way. So for those kind of people, you've got more time to prepare now. So if you can use that time to prepare, your body might be more conditioned to handle more races, and therefore doing more races might be okay. Of course, it depends on the types of races you're doing. Having said that, the body can only still handle so much before it starts breaking down. And we're not talking 5 or 10K races. We're talking 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile races. And for a lot of people, even with an extra 4, 5, 6 months to prepare, 100K, 100 mile takes a lot out of them, even at the level of just finishing. And the idea that they can pop a few more races in is just not realistic. But having said that, if you can take your training volume from, say, 50 miles a week to 70, 80 miles a week, potentially you could handle more races. But for a lot of people who racing is about racing is about finishing the race as fast as they possibly can. The more big races you do in a shorter period of time, the more fatigue is going to accumulate, and the less likely you are to be fresh enough in the back end of a goal race to be able to push that and get the result you're after. So I think you have to be honest with yourself and understand how fatigued you are after a race, and think, well, really that's not realistic to add 2 extra 100K races into a 4-month period when I'm not usually doing that. I think you just have to be realistic and go, you know what, I'm just going to have to forget these races this year, concentrate what I can do and not try and make up for what I couldn't do. And what that might mean is that races that have been postponed, you might just have to suck it up and go, I can't do both the race that is postponed and the race I normally would have done, which is 2 weeks after that. It's just not possible. If I do, the second race, I'm going to be a high risk of injury, high risk of a poor performance, high risk of a DNF. What's the point? Why don't I just scrap one of them, enjoy the one race, do it the best I can, and cut my losses? Having said that, if it's 10K, 10-mile trail races, you can probably fit more of them in than usual, but you just probably have to adjust your training accordingly, because you can fit a 10-mile trail race in, subbing it as a tempo run, no problems at all. So instead of doing, say, a tempo run on Thursday, you do that as your trail race on Saturday or Sunday as a 10K or 10-mile tempo run. But in terms of ultras, I think you have to be a little bit smart and realistic on how you respond from races, how long you take to recover, and what your injury risk is. Like, I coach athletes that the number of races they do is just ridiculous, and they respond really well. They never seem to break down, and they do quite well at these races. But they are few and far between. And too many people see those athletes, because they're usually fairly high profile, and go, well, if they can do 4 100K races in 3 months and podium, well, why can't I? I don't want a podium, I just want to finish. But not everyone's like that. For some people, once every 3 months is the most they can handle. So I think you just need to be realistic, cut your losses sometimes, and focus on what you really want to do, not try and squeeze it all in.
Yeah, one other kind of key difference I've heard from some of my friends that have done ultras, specifically on the trails versus a road marathon, is that a longer trail race, say 50 to 60 to maybe even 100K, will leave you less sore than a fast only road like asphalt marathon. What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, I think that's true up to a degree. It depends on the person, but I'd probably say around 50 mile is the kind of transition period between, like, a hard 50K trail race versus a hard marathon. I take the trail race every single time. My legs would be good to go within less than a week. A hard road marathon, as you well know, it's you trash your legs big time. 50 mile, for a lot of people, that's that kind of borderline where your legs might not be quite as sore, but the overall fatigue due to the duration starts to mount up versus the soreness. And for 100K, for a lot of people, most people that do 100K trail races probably couldn't push hard enough in a flat road marathon to get the soreness that someone like yourself could get. So for them, 100K might be better than a road marathon. So it really depends on the athlete and what they've trained for. But around that kind of distance is where it's at. So if you're primarily a road runner moving into trails, it's kind of different than if a trail runner moves into roads. Because a trail runner moving into, say, a road marathon will probably be a lot sorer than a road runner who's moving into a undulating runnable trail race. If a road runner moves into a steep mountain race, then they're going to be sore because they're not used to the downhills. So it just depends where you're coming from. But yeah, definitely around that kind of 50-mile distance is where it kind of is the transition.
Awesome. We're getting close to an hour, so we'll wrap up relatively soon. We still have a couple listener questions. Then I want to touch on at least one or two of the questions that we have in the other topics here. Andrew asks or states, I was training for comrades and have now backed off long runs. I'm keeping up medium and short, faster runs to some degree, but I'm also doing a lot more indoor cycling on Zwift. Will this harm my running? And I assume the will this harm my running is applying specifically to keeping medium and short, faster runs, as well as doing lots of indoor cycling.
Yes, that's a good question that goes, with a lot of triathletes out there, is how much does the bike affect your run and vice versa. I think if you've got to focus on some shorter, faster runs, which is great, and you should be doing that. The question to ask yourself if you're doing some high intensity bike training is, does that affect your run training? So you can only handle so much intensity, whether it's biking, swimming, running, or any other sport. Your body can only handle so much high intensity work. Of course, if you're mixing up the types of exercise, you can handle more intensity. Now, as an Ironman triathlete, I can handle a lot more intensity than I can as purely a runner. But still, there is a limit on what you can do. You can't just go Monday hard run, Tuesday hard ride, Wednesday hard run, Thursday hard ride. Like, you'll get to a limit where things are being affected. So I think you need to ask yourself is, do the hard bike rides affect my hard runs? And if they do, does that matter? If there's no races coming up, so well, I'm more just trying to keep a bit of a balance, trying to enjoy my hard sessions. I'm not too fussed if I'm a little bit more fatigued for one or the other. Fine, that's cool. But if you think, well, I really want to still maximize the training benefit from those hard runs, then you need to think about, is your bike training or is your strength training affecting those hard runs? And then if it is, then you've got to think, well, can I move the strength training or the bike training to another day to give myself a bit more recovery so those hard runs aren't being affected? And if you can't, then you need to balance up what's more important. For a lot of people, though, they can typically handle at least one hard bike session without any effect on your run training. And that's something good to do because you can do it inside, it's safe, helps keep you sane. So if you have got access to a bike and you enjoy that kind of thing, then I can't see any real issues doing that.
Right. That emotional aspect is still an important thing to keep training in these times for sure. Jen adds a comment here saying still have Leadville not canceled yet. And yet is the key word there, but definitely still have Leadville right now. I'll do this last question here and then touch on a couple more topics, and we'll come back to listener Q&A. So if anybody has any questions before we wrap up, please put them in the chat here. Question here is, any more ideas about coping with downhill training without local trails or hills available and a time frame to put that new work in, like the last 8 weeks, or start earlier because it's new stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I learned, and this is new to me, is shuttle runs are great for downhill. As I said, you have to get the speed up in those shuttle runs to get the deceleration forces required. Because when I first did running up and down the backyard, I didn't notice it at all. It was only when I picked up the pace in between that I started going, my legs are feeling just like they were when I was running downhill. So I think if you haven't got access to downhills, whether that's road or trail, then putting in a session of short shuttle runs. And when I say short, if you've got the luxury of running however long you can, then you want enough distance to get some decent speed up, but short enough that you require a number of turnarounds, because the more slow downs and speed ups you get, the more loading you're going to get. So if I had optimal distance, I'd probably say about 50 meters is a good balance between getting the speed up enough and getting enough turnarounds to maximize the loading on the legs. So that's one thing for downhills. The second thing is strength training, obviously. Jump lunges, hopping, jumping, skipping, box jumps, walking lunges, any of that kind of stuff, definitely beneficial. And there was a question there on time frame. Could you just repeat that again?
Yeah. So the question here is, like, the last 8 weeks or start earlier because it's new stuff. And I think Andy just dropped out temporarily. I think he's going to join here in a second. There he is. Yeah, the time frame here is like the last 8 weeks or start earlier because it's new stuff. So this just might be a question of when should I add in a specific stimulus like this, even if, like, let's say somebody has a race that hasn't been canceled yet and they want to work on these specific sort of downhill coping training mechanisms. Is the last 8 weeks okay, or should they start even earlier because it's a new stimulus for them?
Yeah, look, I think starting earlier as it's a new stimulus to figure out how you respond to it is probably what I would be doing. Typically for downhill work, I would be looking at the hardest downhill sessions are typically 4 to 8 weeks out from a race. Downhill training's quite intensive, high risk, more load on the legs. I don't suggest much specific fast downhill training. For most of my athletes, we do 2, maybe 3 sessions of really fast downhill. They'll do plenty of downhill work through hill reps, running easy back down and their long runs anyway. But looking at really fast downhill stuff, it's only 2 or 3 sessions. Only 2 or 3 sessions of really fast downhill work in that last 4 to 8 weeks. But as it's a new stimulus and you don't know how you're going to respond, I would start it kind of a bit before that, just to get a feel for how it works for you, how your legs respond, and you go, actually, this is pretty tough. Like, my legs really felt that. All right, I might leave that till the last kind of 4 to 8 weeks. In my case, I kind of felt it during the session. Post-workout, like the day after, legs didn't feel too bad. Either done more or pushed faster, or given myself more, like if I had a race coming up, I could do that almost every week. I could do that session. So understanding that would allow me to kind of plan how much of that I should do. Yeah.
Awesome. I want to ask this last listener question, and then maybe if you have time for one last question from some of the topics that we were touching on. Arlene says, I've got a 50K in October and a 50 miler in November, I hope. What kind of base mileage and distance should I be doing now? And maybe you could give a general recommendation for somebody under your training doing 50K and 50 miler, what type of mileage they might do. Or maybe even if somebody is normally training at X amount of mileage, what % should they be focusing on now for their base period?
Yeah, so look, the way I kind of structure most of my clients, obviously it's different depending on the athlete, but peak volume is in the kind of 10 to 4 weeks pre-race. So 4 to 6 weeks is where the maximum long runs are and the highest mileage is. After 4 to 5 weeks before you race, then I start to kind of taper things off and start reducing the volume and reducing the long run. So you've got to think about, what's my longest run going to be? That's going to be between 4 to 6 weeks out from my race. So if your race is in, say, mid-October, then your longest training run, your biggest volume is going to be end of August, early September. And then you work backwards from there. You think, where am I now? Okay, so we're in early April. So we've got April, May, June, July, August. We've got 5 months to gradually build my volume up to maximize at early September. What that volume looks like, look, for the typical client who's got a job, can only train a certain amount of hours per week, running isn't their profession, they're not an elite, then we're looking at around 60 miles, 50 miles, 70 miles, maybe 80 miles max, as the sustainable volume that they can manage. Sorry, I'm in quarantine and I've just got the police at my door making sure that I'm in quarantine.
They can watch the live stream and see that you've been here for the past hour, right?
So for most people, around that kind of 60 to 70 mile is the most they can maintain week in, week out. So I tend to build my clients up to that, and then we'll maintain that whilst increasing the volume and intensity. So, once you get to, say, 60, 70 mile, and that's where, you can't do much more without it being a real stress on your body and your lifestyle, then I would start upping the tempo runs. You might be doing, 2 by 15-minute tempos. You might build it up to gradually 3 by 20 minutes at that peak, kind of 4 to 6 weeks out. Then you'll drop off again. So that's a rough rule of thumb. Of course, some people might only manage 40 miles a week. And I've coached athletes to do 100Ks races really well at 40 miles per week. I've had some athletes do really well at 100 miles per week. But the sweet spot for a lot of people is 60-ish miles, 50-ish miles per week. And you know yourself how long you can sustain peak mileage at, depending on your work stress, your family stress, and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Because I feel like a lot of people have been thinking that is, okay, I know I need to change, but I don't know how much I need to change my volume by, or don't know how to structure my training. So I feel like that comment will, give a lot of information for people in any case. I want to wrap up here by asking one kind of question about what you think the future of running is going to look like, because we're going to make things through to the other side. There's the light at the end of the tunnel. We'll all come out and be able to start and finish our races, down the line. But what do you think any repercussions might be? Do you think people might be more privy to doing a virtual race, or maybe taking more time to work at home and focusing on recovery? What is maybe one or two outcomes you see for the future of running after people going through this type of situation?
Yeah, I think virtual race is the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, I know this weekend there's a virtual Biggs Backyard race, which for those who don't know, it's you run your own 6.66 kilometre loop. You start on the hour, and then when you finish that, you've got as much rest between when you finish and the next hour, and then you go again. So they've got over 2,500 people worldwide. Everybody sets up their own video cam in their house. It's a trust-based thing. I mean, you've got to show your watch or whatever, and it goes to a last one standing. So you've got elite athletes, and you've got people. I've got a client who's living in Kuwait who can't leave her apartment really, so she's doing it on the treadmill. So that is unheard of 2 months ago, and yet here we are doing a race with athletes all over the world, all different abilities, all different courses, and everyone going into it in a spirit of inclusivity and just having fun and testing themselves within the constraints of what they've got access to, which I think is fantastic. And I think that kind of thing probably won't stop. I think that will continue to happen. Virtual races will become something that happens and continues to happen, which I think is fantastic. It just opens up to everybody worldwide. All you need is an internet connection. I think in the short term, people are going to be a lot more appreciative of the ability to run anywhere they like, the ability to run trails. I know for me, I'm running up and down a 20-meter stretch of my driveway. The thought of running out on some roads is like, I can't wait for another 6 days and I can do that. Whereas, we're all guilty of going, I can't get to my trails today. It's just a boring road run. It's like, what do you mean boring road run? I don't have to turn around every 20 meters. That's fantastic. And I think that will last for a while until we get, comfortable and familiar and complacent again. But I think we just have to think back to what it was like and go, I'm pretty lucky I can run to my trails and enjoy my trails. So I think an appreciation of the ability to run anywhere will be higher for a while. I think people will hopefully learn the benefit of strength training because they've got more time, and they'll hopefully do it in the next 2 to 3 months and see the benefits from it. Understand you don't have to do more than 2 lots of 20, 30 minutes a week to get the benefits and keep that up. So I think that'll help them more with injury prevention. I think for the short term, they'll be more appreciative of races. Hopefully they'll be more respectful of race directors. I've seen some pretty appalling comments on some forums on races being cancelled and why didn't I get a full refund. Race directors are doing it really tough at the moment, and I think next year you're going to see a lot less races happening. For those of you who haven't got much experience with race directing or don't know any race directors, most of their expenses are paid by 2 or 3 months out from the race. So if they cancel it, they've lost a truckload of money and they can't refund everything, or they're going to be bankrupt and they're not going to see the race next year. So I'm hoping to see that people are a lot more respectful of race directors, a lot more thankful that they're putting races on. So I think that's what's going to change. I think virtual races, hopefully more strength training and more recovery work, because people are going to see the benefit of that, and just appreciation for races full stop. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I want to actually wrap up by asking you the last question and ask you, where can people find out more about you? Where can people maybe ask you questions or look at your coaching services?
Yeah, so my website, first of all, mile27.com.au. Don't forget the AU, or you'll be taken to a New York design company, which you can't confuse for a running company, so that's okay. I'm pretty active on Facebook, both my own Mile27 Facebook page. As you would know, on the Stryd forum, I'm pretty active and always try and comment on any questions on trail or ultra related questions. Instagram as well, Mile27 Coaching, I'm on there as well. So I'm pretty personable. I tend to be pretty open with advice to people. So please, any questions at all on either what we chatted about today or anything power, trail, ultra related, just get in touch. And I'm more than happy to chat with you, help you out, definitely.
Awesome. I will put all the info, again, if you're looking, look in the description in the YouTube, as well as the show notes for the audio version of this. Andy, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you spending your time in quarantine, some of it with us. I hope it helps pass the time, and I'm sure people will really enjoy this. I hope we've converted a few people that consider themselves only road runners to at least be intrigued and thinking more about a trail or ultra race too. But for now, hope everybody's staying healthy and safe. We'll be back next week with another webinar. Thanks again, Andy. We'll be back.
Pleasure. Catch you later.